This lesson we are going to be treating creation of vectors, different ways of creating vectors, what vectors are, why we use them, and how to create them. So let's begin. Command history. Right. So here in our command window, let's begin creating vectors. A vector is just an array of numbers. Right. So an array of numbers, a sequence of numbers one following the other. So in MATLAB we have two types of vectors, the row vector and the column vector. In the row vector, numbers are arranged in a row horizontally, while in a column vector, numbers are arranged vertically in a column. So a single column of numbers constitutes a column vector. Single row of numbers constitutes a row vector. So in MATLAB, we use vectors for numerous things like representing signals, representing records, and holding values. So if we come here, so a row vector. So a vector is also a matrix, just that it's one-dimensional. The one-dimensional matrix is a vector. So the row vector, 1 by n. A row vector is a 1 by n matrix, meaning that it has one row and n columns. So you describe a matrix by the number of rows and columns it has. So a row vector has only one row because the numbers are arranged horizontally, and the number of elements is the same as the number of columns. So that will be the n here. In this case, this will be a 1 by 3 matrix, or a row vector containing 3 elements. Now this column vector is a 3 by 1 matrix. So every column vector is an n by 1 matrix. It is a 3 by 1 matrix, or a column vector having 3 elements. Right, so let's see how to create these in MATLAB. So in MATLAB, we create vectors by enclosing the numbers in square brackets. So for a row vector, we separate the numbers. We can separate the numbers with commas. So this will create a row vector containing 6 elements, 1 through 6. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We can store this in a variable. Right. Another way of doing this is by separating. Is that you can separate. You can separate the elements with spaces rather than commas. So you can also create a row vector. You can create a row vector either by separating the elements with spaces or with commas. It's easier to see what the elements are if you use commas. It's more explicit. Right, so this is how you create a row vector. Just list out the numbers and separate each of them with either commas or spaces. Right, so let's see how to create a column vector. So a column vector, the only difference between a column vector and a row vector is that you don't use commas or spaces. Instead, you use semicolons. Use semicolons to separate the elements. So what the semicolon will do is that to say it will take the next item after the semicolon to the next line, right? So the comma or the spaces will just continue the next element on the same row. But for the column vectors, after you put in a semicolon, the next element will be taken to the next row. So 1, then 2 will go to the next row, then 3 will go to the next row, 4 will go to the next row, then 5 will go to the next row, and then 6 following. So this now is a column vector containing 6 elements, right? So let's create another one. Right, so this is another column vector. This is how we create row vectors and column vectors. Okay, so we can transpose a row vector into a column vector and a column vector into a row vector. Right, so let's take vector 1. Right, vector 1 is a row vector. If we add an apostrophe at the end, this now means transpose this vector from being a row vector to a column vector. So this will now give me the transpose of this row vector, 654321. Right. If we do the same thing with vector 4, vector 4 will now become a row vector. Vector 4 transpose will return a row vector. This does not mean that I've changed to vector 4. Vector 4 is still a column vector, just that the evaluation of this means give me the result will be a row vector. Evaluate this and return it, save it to answer. So this now is a row vector. However, vector 4 still remains a column vector, unless you explicitly state that you want vector 4 to be updated to its transpose. Vector 4 will remain a column vector. So if we do this now, whenever we call vector 4, you see vector 4 is now equal to a row vector. So we can return it back to its original state. Vector 4 is now back to being a column vector. Alright, so this is the first way of creating a vector or row vector, just by listing out the elements. Same thing with column vector. Another way of creating a row vector is by using the column operator. So let's say you wanted a vector. Let's say you wanted a vector containing numbers 1 through 10. So this is what you would do: 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Now what if you wanted a vector containing numbers 1 through 100? Excuse me. You would then have to manually type out the numbers 1 through 100 using this method, which is unturnable. So what we do is you use a column operator. That means that you use the column to say that you specify the minimum and the maximum, and then it's going to give you a range of numbers where with an interval of 1 in between each of the numbers. So this now will give me the same output as this. So this means give me the numbers 1 through 10, the vector of numbers containing minimum of 1 and maximum of 10, and the interval between the two numbers is 1. So 2 minus 1, 3 minus 2, 4 minus 3, etc. Right. So if I wanted let's say 5 through 15, this will give me 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Right. If you wanted 10 to 1 through 1000, you could also do it this way. So if I do this now, within vector 4 you would have numbers 10, 11, 12 up to 1000. Very simply done. Okay, next, what if you wanted a different interval between the numbers other than 1? Right, let's say you wanted even numbers from 0 to 10. How would you do this? So what you do is between the minimum and maximum, you specify the interval you want. By default, it's 1, but you can state it out explicitly this way. So if you enter this, you see now that the interval has changed from 1 to 2 because we specified the 2 here. So this is 0, jumps to, jumps to, jumps to, and now you have even numbers from 0 to 10. You can have even numbers from 0 to 100. You could have even numbers from 10 to 100. Right? You can have odd numbers if you want to. Let's do to 30. Odd numbers from 1 to 30. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, up to 29. It doesn't go beyond the maximum that you specify here. Right? We could also have smaller intervals, 0.5. 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, up to 5. Could even go smaller if you want. Okay, so you can specify whatever interval you want between the numbers. So using the calling operator, you can specify the interval between the numbers, but you can't specify how many numbers you are going to have, right? So one thing you can also have is, what if you wanted numbers going backwards from 10 to 1? And this isn't how you would do it, because from the default interval is always 1, the increment is always 1. So you can't add 1 any number of times to 10 that will take you back down to 1. So what you're going to do instead is to specify a negative interval. This now will be 10. You add the interval minus 1 to 10, that will give you 9. Add the interval 8, 7, all the way going down. So you keep subtracting from 10. That is how you get to 1. So if you have a larger start initial and a smaller final, or beginning and end, you have to specify explicitly that the interval is going to be negative. If not, it's going to keep adding a positive interval, which is not going to be a valid vector, or is going to be empty rather. Gives an empty vector. All right. So if we wanted 20 to 0, so to count down the even numbers from 20 to 0 using this negative interval here, 20, 18, 16, 14, all down to 0. You can even specify a, let me say this is 0. Wait, you can also specify negative initials and ends. So from negative 2 to, let's say, negative 60. Now if you keep adding if we left it like this, we'll have an empty vector, because you can't keep adding 1 to 2 to get you to negative 60. You'd have to keep subtracting. So we have to put in a negative interval if we're going backwards, and then put in negative 5. Right. So we could have this from negative 2 to 60, increment of 1. Right. So in this, using the calling operator, you can specify whatever interval you want. You can specify the start, the end, and the interval. If this start is larger than the end, then your interval will have to be negative. If you do not specify an interval, then the default will be 1. Right. And you can specify however large and however small an interval as you wish. All right.